I had asked him about time phenomena, time travel. I remember I asked him in the early 90s, I said, is time travel possible? And he says, you're not ready to have that discussion yet. Like, when I asked him a few years later in the late 90s, he said, hey, get in the car. Let's get in the car. We got to go for a ride. So we went out and we rode out into the countryside, and he stopped, and then he proceeded to tell me that we, at that time, that would have been the U.S. government, because I was an Air Force officer when we had this conversation. He says we figured that out about 100 years ago, and I'm having this conversation, you know.
Good evening, and welcome to Codega's Codex of Curiosities. Tonight's curiosity is all about portals, time travel, and Disneyland. Yeah, you heard that right. Disneyland. So, who do we have on who's going to come talk about that? Well, we have Walter Bosley. Walter Bosley is an investigator of historical occult mysteries. He's an author of pulp fiction novels and a screenwriter who has appeared on History Channel's Ancient Aliens. Walter Bosley lives in California, and he is going to bring the heat when it comes to this topic. He has some fantastic insights and great knowledge. He has written countless numbers of books. I would say, I think around 12, at least over a dozen books. So we're going to hear from him tonight. But before we do that, let's take care of some general housekeeping. Click that like. Yeah! If you're new here, subscribe and have the bell hit for notifications to stay up to date on all of the new content. All right, and with that, I want to tell our listeners, not our viewers, but our listeners who are listening to this on Spotify, Apple, Google, Amazon, whichever platform, you need to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Well, why is that? Well, our YouTube channel has numerous other videos. So not just these regular interviews, I have other great content that I'm putting out. I try to put out maybe one a week, or, extra content, one a week or one every 2 weeks. Depends how busy I'm getting. But what I want you to do is come on over to Codega's Codex of Curiosities, to our YouTube channel, and subscribe. Check out what we have. I have a backlog of all my original stuff when I was with the Lost Frequency podcast. So that's all there. But I have all my new stuff as well. And I'm working on something special. Hopefully, when this releases, I'll be pretty close to dropping a really awesome. I want it. Maybe it's going to be a documentary. I don't know yet. We'll see. We'll see what it turns out to be. But it's going to be really, really fascinating. So I want you all to make sure you like, subscribe, comment on the videos. And if you haven't done so, join the Facebook group as well. Leave us some messages in there, and I'll message you up. And if you haven't sent me a friend request on Facebook, by all means, please send me a friend request. But let me know that it's because of Codega's Codex of Curiosities why you're sending me a friend request, because we're all getting inundated with all these friend requests, and most of them are just bots. And I know you guys aren't bots, so send me a friend request and I'll make sure to accept it. All right. On that note, we're going to jump and bring on Walter here right away. A Codega is a guide and a storyteller, escorting you through the night, lighting the way, warding off thieves, ghosts, demons, and other oddities. Along the journey, his companions would often share with him the most curious of stories that he'd record in his codex. Perhaps you just might find yourself traveling with a Codega and sharing one of yours. All right. Welcome this evening to Codega's Codex of Curiosities. And tonight I have an esteemed guest, Mr. Walter Bosley. So I want to welcome Walter to the show.
Hey, good to be here, Rye. I'm looking forward to this
Awesome.
topic. Is a favorite discussion of mine.
When I heard it the other day, I was like I said earlier, I was just enamored with it. I was thought this was an amazing topic, and that topic, of course, is if you want to tell our guests, our listeners, I mean, sorry, what
Well,
the topic is.
it's this book here.
Yeah.
This was my first nonfiction book, by the way, and it's Latitude 33, Key to the Kingdom: The Arcane Science and Hermetic Engineering of Disneyland. But of course, it gets into things beyond the confines of the park.
Oh, fantastic! I am looking forward to this. I was just talking with some friends of mine prior to this, and
Mhm.
they heard that I had you coming on, and they were pretty jealous. They're like, "Wow!" They said that
Cool.
episode was fantastic. Yeah, and I
Thank you.
also know that you wrote another book too, kind of a fiction book, kind of based on all this information. I think it's called "I Will See You in Time."
Yes, it's the time travel novel. I thought if I had that handy, I
Ah,
would. Yeah, what's interesting is after I wrote Latitude 33, I was looking to continue the research on the intersection of the Telluric currents that we'll be talking about here. That are that's in the intersection is in Disneyland. So I was kind of following them out of the park through Southern California. And anyway, long story short, um, that led to what became my big nonfiction trilogy, the Empire of the Wheel trilogy, an investigation of weird occult murder and espionage here in the San Bernardino Valley. And while I was, when I finally decided to write that book, because I investigated the Empire of the Whale mystery for 2 years before I even decided I was going to write a book. That's how obsessed I was with what I was finding. At the same time that I was writing that Empire of the Whale book, I started writing a time travel novel, which, yeah, used a lot of the concepts that are in this book in time travel. Essentially, the travelers use carousels to travel through time and space. So,
which is really unique, and I had messaged you earlier, and I messaged the that one movie years and years ago, I think back in the 80s, called Something Wicked Comes This Way, and
yes,
it's
something
when
wicked this way comes. The Ray Bradbury
that's
novel.
it.
Yeah,
Thank you. And they used the
yeah,
carousel to transport the people in time. They went backwards, they went back in time, they went forwards, they
right.
grew
Yeah,
old.
yeah, he
Yeah,
can make you old or take the years off your life, and that definitely, that was on my mind when I was, researching for this particular book,
yeah.
and I'll stop flashing it. It's just a habit,
That's all right. That's all right.
Uh,
It's a great book.
oh, thank you, thank you. It like I said, it was my first nonfiction book, and in my opinion, it shows it. I need to go back and do a better polish now that I think I've gotten a little better at the nonfiction writing, but it really it has been an integral uh, part of my research, even on all my other books, because it introduced me to the mysteries of the Telluric current, or popularly referred to as the Ley Lines,
Yeah. Yeah.
and aspects of this research have just continued to pop up in all the other things that I write. So this really is. I look at it as I'm pulling the thread of one big picture mystery, and this was my gateway into that.
This was your doorway into it all, which is
Yeah,
kind of ironic too, being that you know we talk about. I mean, it talks about portals and whatnot, so it is a
mm,
gateway as well.
indeed.
So, do you want to start and tell us like what spurned this? What caused
Mm.
you to write this book?
Well, um, it all starts with a personal weird experience. You have to go back a little earlier to December of 1979 when I had what I describe as a personal awakening or enlightenment experience. And essentially, it was literally that. I woke up, it was a Sunday morning in December of 79. I was on the holiday break from school. I was 16, I was in high school. And I woke up and everything was different. I was different. I'm looking around. It was a weird, strange experience in itself, that impacted my life. It still does to this day. Um, and that had happened in December of '79. And then, I want to say about a year later,
Hmm.
I had a very strange dream that over the course of decades, parts of that dream would come true. In other words, I would find myself in the places and the situations that I had dreamed years before. So it was kind of a glimpse into my own future, this particular dream. And that was in January of '81. Well, a month later, in February.
Yep.
Um, some friends and I went to Disneyland. Now, you got to remember, back in 1981, Disneyland was a little bit different than it is now. If you went, like, if it wasn't summertime, it was during the school year, and you went in the middle of the week. I mean, my gosh, by 5 or 6 p.m., the place was virtually empty, believe it or not. And that was when they were first doing the unlimited passport ticket. And now, when you go to Disneyland, you just buy a ticket and everything's you have unlimited access to all the rides and stuff. Back then, they had the A through E ticket books still, but they were introducing the unlimited passport ticket, and that's what we would get because when you're a Southern California kid, you just go. Back then, you would go to Disneyland a lot. It was like a very often or regular thing. So some friends and I, we went on it was a Wednesday, middle
Hmm.
of the week. And I think we had the day off from school or something, and so we went to Disneyland, and it was in the sometime around 9 o'clock or a little bit after 9 p.m. A couple of friends and I were riding the carousel because doesn't matter how old you are, you ride all the rides. I mean, I
Exactly.
just
Especially when you got it an all inclusive pass.
yeah,
You get to
that's
do
right.
everything.
I just turned 60 in October, and if I went to Disneyland tomorrow, I would ride all the little kiddie rides, Dumbo and all that. You just do the whole thing, right? You're particularly now because you're paying a fortune. By gosh, you're going to ride everything. Um,
Exactly.
so we were riding the carousel, and I saw this older gentleman who at that time I said, yeah, he's probably about 70 years old, wearing a black suit, no tie, white shirt, and he had snow white hair and beard, close cropped, short, neatly cut hair and a neatly trimmed beard. And he was just standing there. If you know your geography of Disneyland, you'll know that where the carousel is, there's this walkway that goes between Dumbo and Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, and it leads you back to the teacups and then the Matterhorn beyond that. And so he was standing on that pathway, as I just described, and he was watching the carousel go around, and he was just, like watching this thing like he was in awe of it. And, went around a couple of times. I saw him 2, 3, 4 times, and then came the spin around that he wasn't there. It's like, okay, whatever. For some reason, I noticed this old guy. So we get off the carousel and we head back along that same path. We go past the teacup ride, and at that time, they had a bench beneath the monorail track next to one of the columns of the monorail, holding up the monorail track.
Okay.
And he was sitting on the bench, this old guy. And I just felt compelled to strike up a conversation with him. I can't explain why. Something made me approach him and ask, hey, you having a good time? Just the small chit chat. To this day, I cannot remember the sound of the man's voice. I cannot remember his voice. I just remember his excitement, his energy, his this look of wonder in his eyes. This was like the most amazing place he had ever seen. I'd grown up going there.
Yeah.
Um, but so my friends and I were chatting with him. We find out his name is Alfred, and this
Okay.
is his first time at Disneyland. And he's getting low on his tickets. I think he only had like one A ticket and one E ticket or something. And so he wanted to ride um, It's a Small World. So we took him over to It's a Small World and we rode it with him. He sat up front, we sat behind him, and the whole time he was just, now most people, everybody makes fun of It's a Small World, the little dolls and the incessant song and stuff. But
Yes.
yeah, he just thought it was wonderful. And we get off the ride and we walk back to where he was at the bench. And, you know, something again compelled me. I took my passport ticket, my unlimited passport, and I gave it to him. In fact, we pinned it on the lapel of his coat. You would have thought that I had given him a pot of gold.
Wow.
He was incredibly grateful. I mean, noticeably very grateful. And I said, hey, the park's open for like another hour and a half or so. With this ticket, you can go ride whatever you want as many times as you can before the park closes. And goes, oh my gosh, thank you. Thank you, thank you. And off he went back into Fantasyland and, turned a corner, and that was it. And my friends and I went along our way. And so, that seemed to be it. I did a nice thing for an old man at Disneyland. But it stuck with me for years.
Hmm.
I just had a feeling that there was more to this encounter than what was on the surface. And years later, 11 years later, by this time I'm working for the FBI, and I had been assigned to Manhattan, and I'm on my lunch hour. And there's a bookstore there. I don't know if it's still there in Columbus Circle, called the Coliseum Bookstore, but I would go there on my lunch breaks. And I was in the UFO and weird phenomena, the weird section that we all love.
Yes, exactly.
And I had, in the intervening years after that encounter with old man Alfred at Disneyland, I had in the late '80s, mid to late '80s, learned about ley lines, okay, telluric current. And these guys back then, I forget who they were, but they had done an analysis like around 1986 or something, in which they said at the intersections of these ley lines, there is a larger number of reports of strange phenomena, including UFOs, ghosts, Bigfoot, what have you. It just seemed that there were clusters at the intersections of the ley line, which I came to know more accurately as Telluric Current. And so by '92, I was aware of that, and I had learned about the so-called ley lines then. And so there I am in the bookstore in '92, and I'm looking at this book. I pick up this book, The Old Straight Track, and it's about a guy who in 1928 had studied ley lines. And I thought, oh, these are those lines that I read about, that the clusters of UFOs at the intersections and all that stuff. And I look at the book in the front; it's by Alfred Watkins, okay, and most people know who Alfred Watkins is now. And I open up the book, and that's when it really entered Weirdland, because there was a photograph of Alfred Watkins, and I kid you not, I'm just standing there stunned, because I'm looking at the face of the man I met at Disneyland 11 years prior. Same hair, same beard. It was him. It was his face. And
And he was that age back in the when
he
he lived.
well, I yeah, at the time that he published the book, he was researching the book and published it. He was 69 years old. And remember, I had him pegged at 70,
Yeah.
is what I placed him at. And I'm just stunned. I'm like, wait a minute, what the heck? So then, I look further and I realize, okay, he did the research in 27. He published the book in 1928. He died in 1935. How could I have seen him at Disneyland in California? Because he was in England. He was doing all this in England. How could I have seen him at Disneyland in 1981? Why can't I remember the sound of this guy's voice to be able to say, okay, did he have a British accent or anything?
Yeah.
What the heck's going on here? So then for years after that, I, was convinced I had some kind of weird encounter at Disneyland, and I can't answer the question. I can't explain it. Now, in the intervening years, what you have to understand is, remember, I had that enlightenment experience.
Yeah.
Okay, a little over a year before this encounter at Disneyland, I had the dream, which showed me a premonition of years and years of my life to come.
Hmm.
The month before, and then I have this encounter at Disneyland with this Alfred guy. Okay, so after that,
Yeah.
I had a mentor, both a professional, in my career, national security community in the U.S., and also with esoterica and the occult and weird stuff. And that it was an uncle of mine. He when he retired with 44 years in the U.S. intelligence community.
Wow.
And so he was really my kind of like my professional godfather, my mentor, and all that. So he was teaching me how to develop, you know, the weird skills and things like that. This is a man who taught me about more about psychic abilities. He taught me a method on how to go to a cemetery and basically necromancy, how to raise dead spirits and get information from them. I mean, so and this was
It's quite the
according,
uncle.
yeah, and this he told me more than once. There were people in my professional life who were expecting me to know this stuff, know how to do it, and learn how to do it. That okay, that's a whole story in itself. But this is what my life was for years and years. So you put on top of that
Yeah.
this weird experience with Alfred. So um, I had asked my mentor, my uncle, because I had been thinking for myself and putting two and two together. And I had asked him about time phenomena, time travel. I remember I asked him in the early 90s, I said, is time travel possible? And he says, you're not ready to have that discussion yet. Like when I asked him a few years later in the late 90s, he said, hey, get in the car. Let's get in the car. We got to go for a ride. So we went out and we rode out into the countryside, and he stopped, and then he proceeded to tell me that we, at that time, that would have been the U.S. government because I was an Air Force officer when we had this conversation. He says we figured that out about 100 years ago, and I'm having this conversation, So there's all that in the background. Jump
Yes.
forward to 2006.
Yeah.
And by this time, I've been friends with Greg Bishop. I'm sure you're familiar with Greg Bishop.
Yeah.
Uh, and I've been kind of the informal, unofficial co-host of his show, Radio Mysterioso, for a couple of years. And one day we're talking about Disneyland. The subject of Disneyland comes up. We're wondering why Club 33 is called Club 33. We had heard that,
Mhm.
because it had 33 corporate sponsors, or the 33 corporate sponsors of Disneyland, whatever. Okay, so we pull up Disneyland online during the show. And what I noticed is the GPS coordinates. Disneyland is at 33 point, I think it's 8118 or 1881. It's 8118. Anyway, it's at the 33rd degree north latitude. And by this time, of course, we were well aware of the weird phenomena, the strange things that happen between 30 degrees and 40 degrees north in a band around the globe, including the Egyptian pyramids, the JFK assassination, and on and so forth. So immediately we're like, ooh, Disneyland's at the latitude 33.
Yeah.
And wow. So naturally, I had told Greg about the Alfred story. I'm pretty sure I was talking about it on that episode. And I thought, oh boy, okay, could my Alfred encounter have anything to do with this strange latitude? So that was all of that. And that night on Greg's show is what I finally decided, I had to jump into this. I had to dig into this, investigate it, and it resulted, of course, in the book because the things I learned were just stunning to me. Things I'd always loved the place, always been drawn to the place, but ultimately, what I learned was that the man who engineered physical Disneyland for Walt and his brother Roy was a man named C.V. Wood, who they met at SRI, the legendary Stanford Research Institute that's
Mhm.
involved with what remote viewing and all sorts of other weird things. Their guy is the guy who left SRI and became he became an employee of the Disneys to be the head engineer of designing and putting together physical Disneyland. Now he's the guy that SRI identified the location where they should build the park because they thought they were going to build it out here in San Bernardino Valley, they were going to build it in LA, they were going to, different places. But he said you need to buy these 160 acres of citrus property in the heart of Anaheim, California, because our studies show that there's the freeways and blah 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 to be good business decision. But SRI, if there was ever a company that would know something about telluric current and its strange properties, SRI is definitely one of those organizations. And CV Wood himself was deeply interested in psychic phenomena. He was good friends with a guy named Tom Swift, who was a wealthy philanthropist. He's also known for having headed up the search for Yeti, the abominable snowman. So this guy Swift was into this stuff.
Yeah.
He and Wood were good friends, and he and Wood and another guy created this organization called the Mind Science Foundation. So they were into all this, what psychic phenomena does to the human consciousness. They were into all this, and he becomes an employee of the Disneys to physically engineer Disneyland.
Okay.
And I go into it in the book, but basically, I believe, and I present the evidence in the book, that CV would use this opportunity to create a psychotronic device in a place. And it's my opinion that Disneyland is that, or was designed to be that, and worked that way until they made some changes in 1982, the year after my experience. But basically, Disneyland, the way it's physically constructed,
Yeah.
there's an intersection, according to a guy named Seshari, who did the topographical and geomorphological analysis of the park, the physical location. He identified an intersection of three major telluric currents in the heart of Disneyland, specifically in Fantasyland. And up until 1982, that intersection was directly beneath the carousel. And so basically, what I think Wood did was Disneyland sits in a bowl, okay?
Okay.
Um, and the carousel, while it sat in its original location, hypothetically, um, its rotation throughout the day would draw up the energy from the intersection of the telluric currents. It would draw it up and also spread it around, distribute it so that it would go out and canvas the park. But because Disneyland sits in a bowl, the energy would go through the park, go up the berm, and then come back down and remain contained in the park. Why do I think Wood did this? Simply to enhance the experience in a positive way. And, you know, I get asked a lot, and we'll get into it, but I found nothing negative about this. This was all a guy who was into consciousness and psychic phenomena. And what he really wanted to do was just create this feeling of you were in another world and you were just the happiest place on earth, right? Magic
Yeah.
Kingdom. You're just having a wonderful time. And that's what the experience of Disneyland was until they changed things. Now, what they changed was they redesigned Fantasyland and they moved the carousel about 30 feet back from its original position. So the carousel no longer sits above where this intersection of telluric currents been identified to me. So in my opinion, the device that is the park has been disengaged since 1982. And I'll throw one more little thing.
Okay.
About 11 years after, um, the summer that I first saw that book in 1992 in New York, I
Yeah.
find out later in 2006 that C.V. Wood died in 92, the same year that I made the Alfred Watkins connection.
Wow.
That's in my opinion what we call a synchronicity.
Exactly. I totally agree. I totally agree.
So I go into the book what I think the Alfred experience could have been, multiple possibilities, but
What
there's a
what do
long way around
you
the barn to answer your question.
well, what do you actually believe that was? And we're all about the weird and the strange. It's okay to, to um hypothesize, on what
Okay, well, um, multiple possibilities. One of them could have been that nature, the cosmos, the universe, whatever you
Mhm.
want to call it, contrived that a man who looked the spitting image of Alfred Watkins and had the name Alfred, it was contrived that he would be placed at Disneyland when I was there. And so the meeting would happen so that I would down the road, when I saw the Alfred Watkins book, I would start thinking about Disneyland in those terms. so that I would do the research that I did and write the book that I ultimately did. And of course, remember, I had had that uh, uh, premonition dream the month
Yes.
before. So maybe this was my own subconscious from my own future, having a guiding hand and or whatever. Maybe my subconscious, because it could look further down. Anyway, a contrivance of lookalikes in the same name and circumstances.
Yeah.
Um, Another possibility is that he could have been a tulpa. Just something I created from my subconscious because of, again, that premonition dream.
Yeah.
Um, uh, Yet another possibility.
That's fun. Yeah.
We're getting to my two favorites now.
Okay.
Um, One of them, and this has been my favorite. This was my favorite for a long time, but now it's equal to the one after that. But one of them is that Alfred Watkins himself, in 1927, when he was investigating the ley lines, stepped into an intersection and was transported across time and space to Anaheim, California, to Disneyland,
Yeah.
and that I encountered the real Alfred Watkins. Now, for years, that was my favorite. It was like, yeah, oh boy, I hope that's the case, right? Because that would be the most exciting thing. But there's the problem of the tuidity denan of fairy lore, and that is starting with this book, and in every single one of my other nonfiction books, my research, the tuidity denan keep showing up one way or another. And so this fourth possibility that I talk about in the book is that Alfred was one of them who, through glamoury, made himself look like Alfred Watkins, the author of that book and of that research. And why do I think this? Well, the book goes into the details of what C.V. Wood might have tapped into in Disneyland, specifically Fantasyland, and it happened around there, Fantasyland. Um, Remember when I gifted him my ticket, my passport ticket, he was incredibly grateful. You would have, like I said, you would have thought I'd saved his children, given him a pot of gold, whatever. Well, I learned long after that about the Tuatha De Danann and generally the fairy folk. When you commit an act of sincere generosity, they love that. It's like you have passed a test of character with them, and they reward you. Um, and that's just
Hmm.
just a taste of why I think he might have been one of the Tuatha De Danann. Again, in the book, I go into
The
finer,
fine details. Yeah.
yeah, of why I think that, and I believe that they have made themselves known to me in other very strange and overt ways over the years.
Yeah.
So I'm leaning more towards the Alfred I encountered was uh, uh, one of the Tuatha, again, using this magic, this glamoury that they can do in
Yeah.
our minds, made himself look like Alfred Watkins, so that I would,
Follow this path.
yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
exactly.
I love it. I love every part of it. It's quite magical, actually. Like this path that you're on. Just before we go too far, I want to
Mhm.
go back to that when you were, I think, 16 in December.
Yes.
What exactly, what do you think that was when when you woke up and there was like a slight
Mm,
difference in everything?
yeah,
Was it like a timeline shift, or was it a shift in consciousness, or
both. I think it was both. For years, I
Mhm.
struggled with what was this, because this was intense. When I woke up, here's the thing: I woke up that morning, and the first thing I wake up and I'm like, hmm, and I lift my hands up, and my first thought is, these are not my hands. I'm going to, and then I look and I'm seeing, and now mind you, I was a real nerd kid. I never smoked weed or did drugs or anything, but since then, after having dealt with cancer treatment, I do gummies and stuff now. So it's kind of funny when I describe this part. I'm looking at the wall and I'm going, "Whoa, I'm seeing textures I never saw before." So it's kind of humorous. But I got up, I walked through the
Yeah.
house and I saw my sisters, and I'm like, "Oh, there's my sisters." And then I go in the kitchen. And I'm like, "Oh, there's my mom." And then same with my dad. And then that evening, I'm sitting in the living room while the family's watching TV, and I'm thinking, something's different. I didn't know what was going on. So for years, I had some people say, "Oh, you were abducted by aliens," and I just like, no, it had nothing to do with that. There was no
Yeah.
UFO, that kind of thing. What could it have been? And as I got further along in the mentorship under my uncle and was learning stuff, and then started putting two and two together about the Telluric currents and then time.
Hmm.
That second time I asked him about time travel, and he said, "Hey, we figured that out about 100 years ago." I said, "Well, how? What's it done?" He goes, "I can't talk about that with you. You're not ready to know that." And about a year after that, again, we're getting into the late '90s. I said, "What happened to me in December of '79?" And he says, "Yeah, well, I can't. I'm not going to talk to you about that yet, but." And this is what he said. He goes, "You will figure it out. You will figure out what you did, what I did." Without, dragging it out further, the conclusion I've come to,
Yeah.
it's hypothetical. Nobody has to believe me. You reach a point with this stuff where you cross a Rubicon where you honestly no longer give a crap whether people believe you or not. Okay.
I
When you have
totally, I
right?
totally understand that. You're just like, I don't care what you think.
Yeah, I don't
I
care
don't care
because
what
I
you're gonna
know.
say. This is what I believe.
Yeah, I
Is
know
it
what's
true?
real.
I'm not 100% sure, but this is what I feel. Yeah.
What I think I did, I've mentioned my associate colleague Seshari. He and I were really digging into this time thing because I had written the novel, and our experiences that we had each in our youth and through the years. We were really digging into time travel, the theories and
Hmm.
ideas and stuff. And uh, I thought, wait a minute, did I the first glimmer of it was in again I think it was the same year that Greg and I were having a discussion. We were at House of Pies in Los Angeles after Greg's show one night, and we were with William Moore, the infamous baddie of the UFO world, who got booed off the stage in 1990 or whatever because he admitted he was working for collecting for the government, and the UFO people and stuff. But that's how I met Bill Moore, and we were with him, and we were having a discussion about the nature of space and time. And I remember thinking uh, about I think it's Kepler's second law of planetary motion or something.
Okay.
Anyway, and I came to the idea, an epiphany for me. I may not be the first guy who ever thought of this, but for me, I thought, you know what? I wonder if it's possible to jump back in your own timeline of your life. So the more I thought about this, and the more Seshari and I were talking, and we got to talking about, he works out these things called karmic frequencies that has to do with your age when you were born and stuff. You can
Okay.
even predict probably when you're going to die. I think he predicted when I'm going to die. He hates when I mention that, but I think he did. It's okay. I'll be 81 if he was right,
Well,
long life.
that's not
But
bad. That's great. Yeah. 81
yeah,
is great.
so I thought, I wonder if it's possible to jump back in your own timeline. And I thought, okay, how old was I that morning when I woke up?
Yeah.
I was 16. So, did I do this at 61? And then because of all the Hecate material, you got to hang with me, folks. This is a lot of stuff, and I know I'm yanking you around, but when you read my Empire of the Wheel stuff and all my books, along with the Tuatha De Danann, Hecate, the goddess, the goddess of the crossroads into the underworld, basically she greets you when you die. And I figured out what the crossroad was, the triple crossroad was, and it dawned on me. Wait a minute. I wonder if you can do this when you die. In other words, she stands on the triple crossroad, right? What is the triple crossroad? It's the past, present, and future, where they all come together, and they come together where she stands. So when you die, this is hypothesis, folks. When you die, you stand before Hecate, and she gives you the option. You can stay in the underworld, the other side, for a while, or you can go on to the next life, or where your next destination is, or you can take the past route and go back into the life that you just lived. And so I thought, well, I wonder if, we were talking about transposition of numbers. I
Hmm.
wonder if, 16, 61, that's a transposition of numbers. And then I thought, I wonder if I died when I was 61 years old and then chose to go back. So, do numbers have did age have anything to do with this? If you're 61, you can go back to when you're 16. If you're 51, 15, 81, 18, and so forth. You get the idea. So I thought, oh, wow, there's a concept. This is wild. Did I jump back into my own life? Now, think about it. When I woke up, I said, these are not my hands. Well, maybe it was, whoa, these aren't my old hands. These are my young hands again. These aren't my 61-year-old hands. And maybe when I saw my sisters, I was like, there's my sisters and they're teenagers again. There's my mom, but she's alive or she's younger. There's my dad, he's alive. Whoa, where oh, I'm back. So I finally put it to my mentor,
Yeah.
and he would only give me a very brief response. Um, we had a way, that we would communicate where we would communicate with cold questions, right? In other
Okay.
words, just ask a question without any context, and what it would do is if he saw that I had figured something out, my asking him the cold question would tell him that I knew, right? That of what I was talking about. So remember, he had told me in the late 90s, he goes, you're going to figure out what it is you did when I asked him about time.
Hmm.
Well, I asked him the question. I said, am I right about 61 to 16? That's how I worded it.
Yeah.
I didn't go into it, just, am I right about that? And I got one word answer, yes. And that was the end of the conversation. So I have since then thought, wow, the first time or the last time I lived this life, because I accept reincarnation and
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. The last time I'd lived this life, I'm thinking I died at 61 and then chose to come back. Um,
Oh.
and
I was wondering how, like, the 81, if you're you've been told that was 81, but what you're saying is the previous cycle was to 61,
to 61.
reinstated back at 16, and now you're redoing it and you're going to possibly go to 81.
And think about it. I was diagnosed with cancer in 2020, just stage two.
Mhm.
And I was, let's see, that was the year that I was going to turn 57 in
Okay.
October. So I was 56. Maybe, God forbid, well, maybe that's how it happened. Maybe the cancer killed me in the
Yeah.
last go around. Okay.
Mhm.
Um, you know, so with that and all the other strange things, particularly the intensity of the strangeness. I've been living with high strangeness since that morning in December of 79, but it intensified. I mean, over the years, it intensified in 2007 when I was taught by someone informally how to do remote viewing. Remote viewing opened the floodgates. It led me to Hecate, led me to even more encounters with the Tuatha led me to the Empire of the Wheel trilogy that I ended up writing, and all that mystery, and to this day, there's no going back from what it opened up.
Yeah.
And so Latitude 33, the Disneyland thing, was really my first overt step into trying to figure out my own personal mystery and
Mhm.
just what the heck, Disneyland was really designed to be. So,
And your idea on Disneyland, like you had stated, wasn't nefarious, but it was like an energy collector to take you, transport everyone almost to a different,
frame of
maybe
mind,
yeah, or a different shift. It's like shifted everybody out of like this world. You stepped out of that toroidal
yeah.
current, and you're in this. You're back in the grimy world, but you step into here, and it's a
Yeah.
magical place.
For the time that you're in the park, you're having just a wonderful time, forgetting that there's even an outside world. And
Mhm.
and that, I believe, was the intent. Now, I did the research on all the dark stuff you hear about Walt Disney, and I got to
Yeah.
tell you, I know people don't like to hear this because of the nature of my book, but I found nothing to substantiate all the uh, some of it ridiculous things that are attributed to Walt Disney. However, uh, the dark stuff that you could call dark or nefarious or unacceptable from Disney, that's from, the Disney company long after Walt died. Okay. The putting the sexual subliminal stimulation
Yes.
stuff in
Yeah.
children's movies, that's there. That was done by jerk employees. We're talking decades after Walt died is
Yeah.
when that kind of stuff started, and the greed and the, like, right now I'm not any more impressed with the Disney company than anyone else is.
Yeah.
But Walt Disney was never a Freemason. He was in D Malay as a teenager in high school. And that was the extent of his involvement with Freemasonry. And but like I'm saying, and I looked into that, and I found nothing to substantiate the. And I get people that get angry with me, or they get all, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, okay, you know.
Like I was just talking with a guest on Tuesday night, and he was saying, he's like, I don't like saying I believe in something because he says I'm always open to have my mind change.
It's
I'm
better to say
on.
I think something. I think something, right? I don't like the
Yes.
word believe, even though I've used it 3 times, I think, already tonight.
I think we all do. We all do. It just
Yeah.
happens. It's kind of natural. But yeah, I'm always open to, I'm not set, like in this industry that I'm in, like I'm in the cryptids, I'm in UFOs, but with the cryptid community, there is some definitely like harsh camps. There's like the blood and flesh and blood creatures, or there's the flesh and blood, but also woo kind of thing. And
Mhm.
they don't like getting along. And it's like we always have to be open to accepting that it could be something else. We
What's
don't
silly
know.
what's silly about that is both of them are right, in my opinion.
Hmm.
Just like with UFOs, some are going to be extraterrestrial. Duh. But
Yes.
as Jacques Vallée said years ago, and has said for years, the ET hypothesis comes nowhere near explaining um, thoroughly the UFO mystery. So I don't know, when these camps argue with each other, it's kind of ridiculous because they're both right, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah, exactly. Both right and both wrong at the same time.
Mm,
And it's like, what was I gonna say? So I had another guest on, and he's like, what I saw was flesh and blood. Like he had a super close
mhm.
encounter with a Bigfoot, but he's like, but I can't deny. He says, I don't know. It could have been magical as well. It could have been, some sort of mystical beast. I don't know. What I saw was flesh and blood, but I'm still open to everything else. And I'm like, that is like the perfect. That's how we should all be. And I
That's
have a
smart.
question. Oh,
Mhm,
so we're talking about ET, and that word for it's in itself for me is kind of. I think there's more to it. Like I really like words, and when we say extraterrestrial, which means extra land, and terrestrial means of this earth.
mhm.
So, and I'm like, okay, so they're extra of this earth. Is that what we're implying with this? Is that a possibility? I believe that's a possibility. Is it
Well,
real?
extra meaning external to, like,
It could be, yes. I
but
guess if we
I get what you're saying, and it seems like with that word, the way you explained it and broke it down, why do we need the word ultra terrestrial? Because it seems like extraterrestrial should include all of it. There's the extraterrestrial in the material sense where they come from another planet, or extraterrestrial, not of this earth. From another dimension, right?
yeah,
But we
yeah,
choose to, because ET is so associated with aliens from other planets. We've had to use the John Keel favorite expression, ultra terrestrial,
yes, exactly.
to
Fascinating.
delineate.
And so back to these ley lines as well.
Mhm,
Um, I live in Mexico, and I
mhm,
lived right next to a major intersection, and it was when you went into that area as well. It was called Seville Chatun, and it's right near where the the planetary or the comet killer, the one that took off the dinosaurs. It's very near that location, and I would say like the energy there, like there's a temple built right on that location, and it was
Of course.
very. You walk into there and you feel different. It feels good. There is a nice open cenote, which is like an open water, fresh
So,
water.
so you're in the Yucatan.
Yes, I'm in
Ah,
the
excellent.
Yucatan
Okay.
Peninsula actually, because I'm not in that location anymore.
Okay.
I'm in the Yucatan Peninsula, but not in the Yucatan itself.
Okay.
The
Gotcha.
state of
Gotcha.
Yucatan. Yeah,
Excellent.
yeah. It's beautiful here. I did have a sweater on earlier, but now I'm back to a t-shirt.
Yeah.
I record outside, so I can't complain.
Oh, nice. Nice. It's beautiful there. Yeah.
It is. It is. So well, you also have written some other books. I know we kind of dabbled in the Longitude 33.
Mhm.
Uh, what are some of the other books? You said, please enlighten me on these on your other books.
Well, there's the Empire of the Wheel trilogy, which
Yes.
started as I learned about. I told you I was continuing the research that I did in Latitude 33, and that in one of those ley lines that intersect in Disneyland extends out here, connecting to the ley lines here in the San Bernardino Valley. And I came across a ghost story in associated with our oldest extant shopping mall, Inland Center. And when I talked to the lady who had posted it, a local librarian named Ann Walker, she told me about the mystery of this woman, Cora Stanton. She goes, I think it was murder. Go look at the old newspapers. I think you'll agree. And so I did. And having been a former federal agent, I'm a professional investigator. What I did was I found what she was talking about. It happened in 1915. But what I did was then I expanded my circle of research, right?
Hmm.
My radius to previous weeks and months. And what I discovered was between in the fall, between October and early December of 1915, the newspapers were reporting about these seven mysterious deaths, three of them children who were poisoned, and they never solved who poisoned them or could even identify the poison, the toxin, and four adults, two who were or three who were alleged suicides, and one of them was a boating accident. And anyway, long story short, that ended up being a big, thick book on what I believe was a cult themed serial murder. Because all the victims, thanks to Seshari and his analysis, I could identify that all the victims were killed, linked to the Telluric Current grid running through the San Bernardino Valley. In other words, the locations where they died um, were right on Telluric current lines. So that was a theme. Somebody's killing these people, and they're doing it consciously. At the time, on these Telluric current sites,
Hmm.
and even in that book, um, Seshari and I uh, discovered that all of the known Zodiac killer victims. Okay, remember, he said there were
Yeah.
37 more bodies out there that they never found. But the known classic Zodiac killer victims were all killed or attacked if they didn't die, because one of them didn't die, on telluric current points. So we were able to, in our minds, in our opinion, prove the one theme connecting all the Zodiac killer victims, and that is the telluric current grid, and that's a chapter in the book. Well, um, I started pulling threads on that trilogy. I found evidence that suggested that this mysterious Cora Stanton woman was actually, in my opinion, at a place, the associate of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And I've got three books on this huge 7 year experience and ordeal. I was followed from my home. I was being surveilled all over the place by local people who had an interest in keeping this quiet. I had a weird experience with the local coroner's office. I'd requested records of, two of the people who had died, at that time, almost 100 years before.
Yeah.
But boy, did I get an angry, cold response from the coroner's office looking into this 100-year-old case. It's a whole thing. It's a whole thing. So there's those three books. And every one of my nonfiction books, like I did Latitude 33,
Yeah.
pulling the threads on that led me to Empire of the Wheel, led me to the Empire of the Wheel trilogy. But at the same time, with this remote viewing and my research, it led to weird stuff about Juan Cabrillo and Joan of Arc and a possible California connection. So that led to my Secret Missions series. That's 5 books about historical individuals who I believe, I'm convinced, were involved in the secret search for um, lost civilizations. Okay, and
Yep.
they are Juan Cabrillo, Ambrose Bierce, Sir Richard Francis Burton, um, and Napoleon Bonaparte. The 5th book is kind of an overview to give context, and I've got a 6th one on the way, plus a follow up to the Napoleon one. And also, I've written a book about my dad had a weird experience in the Air Force in the
Okay.
late 50s that involved UFO crash retrieval, um, getting briefed in on Roswell, and just MK Ultra and all
Yeah.
sorts of weird stuff. And he died in 2008, 2016. I said, you know what? I've got to investigate his story that he had told me since the early 70s. And that's what my book Shimmering Light is. Okay. So it appears to have nothing to do with the Empire of the World trilogy, with the Disneyland book, with the secret mission stuff about the explorers and the historical figures. Um,
Yeah.
however, um, just like all the other ones, there's evidence and signs and data connecting the Tuatha De Danann to his
Wow.
story. And it's in all of them. It's in the Secret Missions book. Hecate and the Tuatha De Danann are in all these books, which seem to be on different subjects. And I've got another book on breakaway civilizations
Hmm.
and the airship mystery. Um,
That's fascinating as well. The airship mystery. That is something that is intriguing. Yeah.
and the Sonora Era Club and all that. But here's my point is all of this is connected by Hecate and this mysterious race of beings, the Tuatha De Danann.